Hey, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Mando Method Podcast. I am your co-host, Armand Rosamilia.
And I'm the other co-host, Chuck Buda.
We got a great show. Well, I don't know if we have a great show. We haven't taped it yet. This could be an awful show, but I have high hopes. You know me, Chuck, Mr. Positivity.
Of course.
I'm always very positive stuff. So, but before we get into our guest tonight, Chuck, you want to talk to our audience about something?
Yeah, I'll take that subtle cue of you raising a coffee mug to mention reapersbrew.com. So our favorite sponsor here of the Mando Method. Of course, it's a veteran-owned company, and all the theme coffee is horror themed. So make sure that you pick up your K-cups, your single bags, or you can even get a subscription. And don't forget, everything is microbrewed and fresh roasted. And they got the two great flavors, Murder Mud and High Caffeine, which is the electric chair. If you use the coupon code MANDO, M-A-N-D-O, at checkout, you'll receive 10% off of new orders, plus receive a free gift. Go to reapersbrew.com and tell them Uncle Charlie sent you.
Nice. All right, let's get into this. We got a lot to unspool here, so let's start with our first guest. Quick introductions from you guys.
Is that to me?
That's to you.
Okay. My name is Matt Hughes. I'm also Matthew Hughes, and when I do media tie-ins, I'm Hugh Matthews. Most of my stuff out there is Matthew. I'm a Canadian science fiction, fantasy, crime fiction author. I've also got one historical novel that I'm really proud of. I've sold 24 novels, almost 100 short pieces to science fiction magazines, anthologies, and I've been in a few best of the year pieces. I tend to write in a vein of Jack Vance fiction. In fact, I have written one authorized companion novel to a very famous series of Vance books, the Demon Princes series. And last year, John Vance, Jack's son, published Barbarians of the Beyond, which was my companion novel to the Demon Princes. It's a deliberately pulpy title because Vance had one called Vandals of the Void, and I wanted to get that feel. Not sure what else I can tell you. I've been a professional writer all my life. I was the top-rated speechwriter in British Columbia for 25, 30 years. And once my kids were grown and I didn't have to make a living that way, I gave up having a house and possessions and became a world-wandering house sitter, which I've been doing for 15 years. Lived in 12 different countries, visited 9 or 10 others. And right now my wife and I are looking after 3 rather well-aged and mannerly cats in Victoria, BC. And in another couple of weeks, we go to Salt Spring Island, which is in the Gulf Islands. Very nice. And that's my life.
Edward has an unmannerly cat.
I do.
You've met them, yes.
Yes, I'm Edward Willett. This is Shadowpaw, who unfortunately I can't close my door well enough to keep him out. So I didn't expect him to come in, but we've been away, so he's very excited to see us. And yeah, he may poke up here momentarily from time to time. I'm the award-winning author of more than, this is my plotted bio here, I'm the award-winning author of more than 60 books of science fiction, fantasy, and nonfiction for readers of all ages. My main publisher is Daw Books in New York. My 12th novel for them, The Tangled Star, will be coming out very, very shortly, about 3 weeks from now. It's a far future humorous space opera, which in fact features an AI uplifted, genetically modified talking cat who becomes a starship captain. And yes, I was totally thinking of Shadowpaw here when I did it. I've also written for a number of smaller publishers, and I now have my own publishing company, Shadowpaw Press, named after this here cat, which has published, it kind of started publishing me because I had a bunch of stuff that needed to be brought back into the marketplace after some of those smaller publishers went away. But I'm starting to publish new work by both emerging and established authors, including one, Matt Hughes. I have his book comes out tomorrow as we record this, that Shadowpaw Press is publishing, a young adult outdoor adventure tale called The Emir's Falcon. And I have some other new stuff coming up. I'm also doing new editions of previously published notable work. There's several of those out now. One thing I've done through Shadowpaw Press is to kickstart anthologies that feature guests of my own podcast, The World Shapers, which has been going for 4 years now, where I interview other science fiction and fantasy authors about the creative process. And Shapers of Worlds Volume 3 will also be out this month. I somehow, as a one-man publishing company, have somehow managed to decide to publish like 6 books in 6 weeks or something like that. That's what it feels like anyway. I don't know. Yeah, so that's me. I have about 20 some novels out and a lot more nonfiction, everything from children's biographies from Ayatollah Khomeini and Jimi Hendrix, to name just 2 extremes, to local history like the history of the Association of Professional Engineers and Geoscientists of Saskatchewan and things like that. I've been a freelance writer now for 30 years. Before that, I was a communications officer at the Saskatchewan Science Center. And before that, I was a newspaper reporter and photographer and editor. And yeah. Oh, and I also sing and act. I do physical theater and stuff like that.
You have all this free time. Why not?
Yeah.
Add a couple more things in there.
That's kind of a sideline. If I had my druthers, I probably enjoy doing that as much as I do. Well, I don't enjoy rehearsing. That is a problem. I enjoy performing. I don't enjoy rehearsing. So that's kind of a problem.
So obviously, you both have a connection to one another. So how far back does that go?
I don't know when we met, but it's been a long time ago now.
Probably at a VCon.
Yeah, it might
Science
be.
Fiction Convention in Vancouver, maybe even 20 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And we knew each other through SF Canada, which is the Canadian Science Fiction Authors Association. I'm a past president of that.
I'm a past member of it. I kind of miss the list server, but.
So how did you end up publishing Matthew's book then?
Well, we had Matt was a guest on the podcast on the World Shapers, and he had a short story, therefore, in the last anthology, Shapers of Worlds Volume 2. And somewhere along in there, he said, well, he also had this young adult fantasy, non-fantasy story that he'd been looking for a home for. And I think he asked me if because of Coteau, wasn't it? Yeah, you asked me about Coteau Books, which had published some of mine. And Matt had edited for Coteau Books. He edited my young adult fantasy series, The Shards of Excalibur, for Coteau Books. And then Coteau was gone, but I said, but I have a publishing company and I might be interested. So I think that's how that came about.
Yep. And of course, he offered me fabulous money. And
oh, yeah.
I left that.
Lots of zeros on that check, I'm sure.
Lots of zeros.
Only zeros, actually. Yeah.
Well, then I have a question for Edward. Do you have any room to add another author to your slate? No. Jumping back, I guess, to when you gentlemen were talking about, obviously very storied and lengthy careers to date. I guess talk about your writing process, especially, Ed, I guess it sounds like you have a lot of things going on. And then Matt, from your perspective, does the landscape and the changing location add or fuel to your writing process as you've moved around for the last
gives me
15
place
years?
names. When I have to think about a name for a planet, I will think of some village nearby wherever I happen to be house sitting, and I'll call it New That.
Okay.
Otherwise, I think it helps to have lived not as a tourist, but as just, a member of a community in some foreign place and seen all the different ways life can be arranged that you wouldn't think of if you were just a tourist in a hotel and a restaurant passing through. Like, there is nothing quite like an Italian post office on pension day. Everybody is there, and some of them are getting money out, putting money in. I'm not sure all the other things that they do, because virtually everything seems to be done through the Italian post office. But it's a little bit like the bar scene in the first Star Wars movie, except without the music.
Uh,
Um,
for
talk about
myself, I mean, yeah, I do have a lot of things that I do, but I don't know. I don't have a set schedule in what I work on. I do find that with all the publishing stuff I've been doing recently, and I've been doing freelance editing and stuff like that, I do think my own writing has slipped back from where I would like it to be. And so I'm trying to very consciously make that the priority first thing in the morning, is to get in a couple of hours on whatever my fiction project is before I get sucked into the publishing stuff, because there is an endless stream of things you can work on the publishing side to ensure that you lose money a little less slowly.
Yeah, that seems to be the common theme that Armand and I have noticed from talking to people who have ventured into that, aspect of the business, whether it's like you said, for your starting out for yourself, to repatriate work that had fallen off with other presses, and then of course taking on new business. So I think in all our heads as authors, we have that dream of being, the editor and the owner of a press, and doing more than just our own stuff. But yeah, that seems to be the common thread, is everyone struggles to work on their own stuff then. So
it is rewarding, though. I mean, I've discovered I really enjoy publishing books, even if they aren't mine, which is kind of, I don't know why that should be a surprise, but I've discovered I really enjoy the actual process of making that into a thing that other people can enjoy. And hopefully make some money if I keep pushing at it. Maybe at some point I at least isn't a hopeless case.
It's all about time. We wish we had way more hours
I
to do
find
all the things we want to do.
this year I've been really concentrating on audiobooks. Skyboat did an audiobook of the Vance companion novel, Barbarians of the Beyond. And I thought I could take some of my old stuff and do it through Amazon's ACX system. And so far I've done 3 and working on a 4th. The first one was not so good, but I realized you actually have to pay people at least something
Yeah.
to get really professional product. And I've been lucky. I've got 2 very, very good narrator producers. A guy called Jack Winters. He did a series of short stories set in the dying earth about a rather unlucky thief called Raphalon. And the book is called Nine Tales of Raphalon. I've been selling it as an ebook and paperback for, I think, 7 years. And now I'm getting it out there as an audiobook. And Jack did a wonderful job of, when I hear the characters in my head when I'm writing, they're pretty much all the same, but he gave different personalities to them, and it came out really well. And then for the next one, a series of stories about a wizard's henchman called Valdemar. And all of these had run in Fantasy and Science Fiction magazine, except for one was in Rogues, I think. No, the Book of Swords, a Garden of Dozwa anthology. And I got a guy called Harry Frost to do that, and he was absolutely a tour de force. The book has been out now since, I think, the 12th of this month, just called Valdemar. And I think I've sold more copies of that book than of Raphalon and the bad one combined at this point.
And one of those stories was in Shapers of Worlds Volume 2, wasn't it?
Yes, actually, yeah. The last little coda, 6,000 word story, was in Shapers of Worlds. Yeah.
So another connection.
Very kindly, Ed gave me permission, even though it was still exclusively contracted to him, through Shapers of Worlds, he gave me permission to make it the little grace note at the end of the Valdemar series.
Yeah, audiobook is just taking off for everybody. It's a lot of times it's that brand new audience that always says, "Oh, I don't have time to read, but dropping the kids off or going on a trip or whatever, I'm listening to audiobooks."
Yeah, well, now that the pandemic has calmed down, people are commuting again, I gather, and they like to listen to their phones while they're on the bus, on the train, or even just driving down the freeway.
I was fortunate in that I was able to get grant money that enabled me to record, not me personally, but to arrange for the recording of the Emir's Falcon coming up, and the other new novel I'm bringing out this fall, which is called Thickwood. And I was able to get the audiobook done ahead of time, so I'm able to release paperback, ebook, and audiobook will all come out simultaneously. And the narrator there was someone who had done my Shards of Excalibur books that Matt edited when it was at Kato Books.
Our lives are interwoven.
Yeah, I was very, very happy with her, and so I was happy. But when I did it through Shards of Excalibur, those books were through ACX, and she did it royalty only. And at the time, I said, "You're never going to make back what." I knew there wasn't going to be enough sales to really pay for that level of work. I didn't think, and unfortunately, I was right about that. So she's now charging, but I was able to get grant money through Sask Books, which is the Saskatchewan Publishers Association, of which I'm vice president. And there's also another micro grant program I was able to take advantage of. So I was able to pay for that up front, because audiobook production, once you have to start paying them, is very expensive.
Yeah.
And I have done some audiobook recording as well. And I know the amount of time and effort that goes into it. And I understand why it's as expensive as it is.
Yeah, and you hope you make you hope you make that money back. You hope you break even, but in the meantime, you hope you're building your readership, who, again, doesn't have the time maybe to sit with an ebook or with a print book.
Ultimately, I think we're creators, and yes, I'm also a business person of sorts, and I have to make a living. And fortunately, I'm married to an engineer, which helps a lot in that regard. But at the same time, there is simply the urge to create and to get this stuff out there so that people can see the things that you have created or hear them. And it's not enough reward on its own necessarily, but it is at least some reward, even if you don't make money. If you at least break even, you have that side of the rewarding part of it as well.
Yeah, as long as you're not living in a cardboard box.
Yeah.
As a creator, you're
I'm
doing good.
close to that. I haven't had a home for 15 years.
Seems like you've managed, though. You've managed to find places.
Well, I've addressed it not from the supply side, but the demand side. I have other people's houses to live in, and they pay for the electricity and the water and the Wi-Fi, and sometimes they even give me a car. So.
Do you return it?
Yes. Although sometimes I have to pay the insurance on it, and that can be really expensive in places like Italy and France. Because it doesn't matter how long you've been driving in Canada without an accident. You start as a very basic in those countries. First timer. 17-year-old.
Wow. Are there places you still want to visit? You still hope you'll get to go and house sit at?
I would like to spend some time in the Greek islands. I was in Athens and I was in Cyprus. I would like to see Crete. Most of the places I wanted to go, Italy, Spain, France, New Zealand, Australia, been there. What I'm looking at these days, I've got something going now that I can't talk about that might yield some really serious money in the next several months, Hollywood money. And if that happens, I think what I'll do is move to Ireland, because I'm still a British citizen, having been born in Liverpool.
Mm-hmm.
So we came to Canada when I was a little boy. And apparently, if you're British, even though Brexit has come and gone, you can still live in Ireland as if you were Irish. And I really liked Ireland. Done 3 sits there, 1 in the North and 2 in the Republic. And I just loved the feel of it. I'm perfectly at home in an Irish pub. They have the same sense of humor I do. So, which is probably my Liverpool sense of humor, because half of Liverpool is Irish. In fact, my mother was a Rafferty, so I've got the genes.
You have something, Chuck?
Oh, yeah. So going back to like the audiobooks. And Armand and I have spent, I don't know how many sessions on our show talking about all having the different hooks in the water, per se, whether it's ebook, paperback, audiobook. And the audiobooks are expensive to produce right off the bat because, like you said, Ed, it's very difficult, if not impossible these days, to find somebody to do the revenue sharing for the recording. You got to lay out the upfront funds to get the thing going. But do you find that your experience with the marketing on the audiobooks, is it seems to be different than what we do for ebooks and paperbacks, whereas that you seem to get some kind of leverage from social media and things of that nature. But the audiobook, at least from my experience, and I don't know, Armand, if you have it too, but it's, I think, a harder to sell via social media. And I still get sales, but I haven't cracked the nut on how to really push those audiobooks out there into the world and get people to take more notice of them.
Yeah, I have no insight because I haven't had much success cracking that nut either.
I was afraid of that.
When the Shards of Excalibur books came out, I did a lot of, I tried to get the word out to all over the place. It didn't seem to make that much difference. So I don't know. As far as I can, the one thing that I knew from my public relations course, which I had to take in university as part of my journalism degree, I remember two things from it. One was don't lie to the media, which is something that is mostly ignored. And the other one is that 90% of PR marketing is wasted, but nobody knows which 90% it is. So I constantly feel like I'm just throwing stuff against the wall and hoping that something will stick.
Yeah, I even did. So I have several books on through ACX, but then I tried Findaway Voices as well because they obviously have inroads to some other distributors. So I gave that a try. The cost ended up being roughly the same as working through ACX, even though there are somewhat different stable of voice talents. But now I'm hoping that Findaway Voices is part of Spotify now, or it will be, I guess, in the coming future. So, I'm hoping that the books that I have through Findaway will get some kind of traction from Spotify, but we'll see. If I learn something, I'll definitely let you know.
If you find the magic bullet, just
yeah.
Well, I'm being prodigal with the promo codes that Amazon gives, and I'm putting them out to anybody who wants to review one of my books. Can have 13 hours of good professional listening for nothing. All I have to do is promise to review it somewhere. And I'm getting some take up on that. I'm going to pitch it again to my Patreon patrons and also to my monthly newsletter mailing list and see if we get some more. I think that it's probably going to be more word of mouth, though, than it is getting actual formal reviews anywhere. I suspect that the people who will want to take up those free promos are the people who regularly listen to audiobooks and have friends who listen to audiobooks that they can say, hey, you should listen to this one. And maybe the friend will buy a copy instead of just borrowing it off the guy I gave it to for free. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But it's all brand new to me. I mean, I had a life in public relations. I was a PR consultant when I was a speechwriter, and I knew the elements of publicity and so on, but it doesn't seem really to apply to audiobooks. It's like a new continent, and we haven't explored it thoroughly yet.
Yeah, there's still a lot for us to learn on that one, and I don't think anybody really has it. I just went to the NINC conference in Tampa the last week, and despite 400 authors there all making really good money, there's no magic secret to any of this. I mean, a lot of it, people were saying, oh, I made $1 million last year and I have no idea how I did it. It was all a crapshoot. Or my audiobooks took off and I have no idea why, because I was selling 2 or 3 a week, and then all of a sudden I'm selling 200 and 300 a day out of nowhere, and I have no idea why. There was nothing changed.
I saw somebody, and of course it was a romance author, but on a Facebook site, the webpage that I go to, she was making $105,000 a month, but she was spending $33,000 a month on Amazon ads.
Right.
And that seems to be, if you've got a big chunk of change in your pocket and you push it out there, you will get it coming back.
Yeah.
Particularly if you're writing romance, because there seems to be an endless, enormous market for that, even though it all basically is the same book over and over again, as far as I can tell.
That reader reads a book a day.
Yeah.
They're literally reading. So we had 400 authors, and 80% of them were romance.
Yeah.
And they're all making crazy money. I mean, a woman who showed me her book report file, and in July, she literally in that month, just with doing 28 romance books, she made $1 million on Amazon in that month.
Yeah.
And she's like, I don't know why. I'm not advertising. I'm not doing anything. I'm just throwing it out there. But it's a lot of word of mouth and everything else. But a lot of that too was
you get
audio.
really selling on Amazon, they bring the algorithm on.
Yeah.
And you get pushed at people.
Yeah. Well, she's getting pushed.
Successfully rewarded.
Yeah. Just that I always look at it as just a crapshoot. We can try things. We can move that algorithm a little bit here or there. We can do something dumb and drop down, but I firmly believe once you get some momentum in this, it's important to keep that momentum going. You know, Edward, you're putting out all these books now, and if you get to that point where all of a sudden you're not putting anything out for months and months, you lose that momentum. Chuck did that. Chuck didn't put out a book for a year and totally screwed his algorithms up, and then it was like starting over again.
Yeah,
put out
it's a challenge.
all backlist stuff, and it does seem to have a knock-on effect. I had a book out in February, another one in May, and then a more recent one just last month, I think. And they it somehow it seems to be a cumulative effect. That people are reading one and then they'll look for another, and there's a brand new one, they'll go for that. So I'm trying to weigh up right now. I've got a completed novel set in my extrapolation of Jack Vance's Dying Earth, where I've done a lot of work over the years. And I'm wondering whether I should simply get a cover done, get Ed to format it, and put it out there on Amazon, or try it again with a conventional publisher.
Yeah, I don't know. That seems to be the thing.
I'm leaning towards calling Ed and saying,
I make a little money that way, so I like that.
No wonder Ed's so busy.
He's a good formatter. If you've got an ebook and you want it to be set up nice, he does a very good job, and it's not terribly expensive. Especially if you're American and paying in American dollars. I mean, hell.
Yeah, if there's one thing I have learned doing everything I've been doing recently, it's I know my way around getting the stuff in the right format and all that. And I really enjoy, I can't do cover art, but if I have a good image, I can make a good looking cover.
Yeah.
And I like that side of things as well. So that's another reason I enjoy the publishing. I enjoy the physical, creating an attractive product that I can look at and say, I'm happy with the way that looks. And it doesn't look like it was knocked out in somebody's basement by somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. It's supposed to be knocked out in my office by somebody who slightly knows what they're doing.
Well, I put out one most recently, a mixed bag of short stories that I did not expect to be doing very well. So I just used an Amazon generic cover. And it was up for about a day or two. And then one of my fans said, "That's a terrible cover. I'll do you one for free," and did me a much better cover with a little photoshopping.
Oh, wow.
So
Nice to have fans.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
nothing like fans in the world. I mean, having people who really want to read you
Yeah.
is, I mean, that's the nicest feeling. I remember reading a quote once years ago. Jimmy Stewart, the actor, somebody came up to him and said, you know, gushing wonderful things about how much your movies have made to me, and then said, "But I guess, you know, you hear that all the time. It doesn't mean much to you." And he said, "On the contrary, it means everything to me. What I want to do, and it's why I'm doing it."
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. I get emails from fans saying, "I hope I'm not disturbing you," and au contraire. I mean, I love that.
Yeah. No, you're making my day usually.
Yeah.
That may be why, if I had my druthers, I might be on the acting side, because of course with stage acting, film acting is a deadly dull thing with no feedback until the film comes out, by which time you have forgotten that you were even in it, if you have the kind of parts I've had in the couple of films I've been in. But on stage, it's always immediate. You can hear people gasp or sob or start coughing, which is not good. But you can hear all that stuff and laugh, of course, and the applause at the end. It's that immediate feedback, and you feed off of that, and you can tell that your performance. And there's a strong connection between acting and writing fiction, because, and whenever I do my podcast and I talk to somebody with acting background, we will discuss this. But of course, the whole process of writing is creating believable characters, inhabiting those characters as the author. That's the only way you can make them come alive on the page. And when you're acting, you're doing exactly the same thing, only you're making it come alive physically on the stage. But I think there's a lot of similarity in those two artistic practices. And but the one good thing about the acting is that feedback comes right away. And with the writing, you put it out there, and then please, somebody tell me you liked it. Please, somebody tell me you read this thing that I spent 2 years writing, or however long it took. So when you do get those kind of letters or emails, it is really nice. And even a review, you know, I read my reviews.
Me too. Let me pick up on that, because one of the things we're supposed to be talking about here is writing process, right? And what you said about inhabiting the characters as you write them, that's how it works with me. I become the characters as I'm being that person, and there's the dialogue in the scene, and now I'm another character, you know, another part of the forest. But I read on writers' sites, discussion sites, that some people write huge biographies of their characters so they can get to know them. They have all lists of character traits and things that happened in the past, and, you know, life-shaping events that are not ever going to go into the story they're writing, but this is how they have to do it in order to encompass their characters. Very strange to me, because I just be the character while I'm writing it. But apparently you and I, Ed, are different from some folks.
Well, I mean, there's a certain amount of thinking about who this character is before I start, but I've never done those. And there was a time when I sort of tried to, and I thought, well, this is boring. I just want to write the character, and I'll get it as I write the character.
Right. Yeah.
One of the great things about doing the World Shapers podcast is, you know, I'm up to episode, in fact, there should have been one this last weekend, but I was traveling, so it's a little delayed. I think it'll be episode 117. So it's 117 science fiction and fantasy authors I've talked to about the creative process. And they're all different.
Yeah. And I think that's the fun of this, though, right? That we all have our own way of doing it.
There's a thing that happened with me way back when I was just getting started in this. I was still a speechwriter. I had some free time to write fiction, and I was working my way into how I was going to do it. And so I was reading those how-to books. And one of the ones that I read was about how to write a breakout novel. And it was written by Ken Follett's agent. And basically what he said is, do what Ken Follett does, which is to pour all of your creative energy into an outline, very detailed outline, and you perfect that. And once you've perfected that, then you just type. and you type the scenes and the lines, and out comes the book. Well, I tried that. I seriously tried that, and it was an absolute failure. I just could not do it. The only way that I can write is I have a character. In that character's more or less normal situation, which might not be normal to my readers, and then something happens, and the character has to react to that problem, whatever it is, that conflict that begins, and then it extrapolates from there. And I get to know who the character is by seeing how the character reacts to other characters and events that happen and so on. And they grow organically in the back of my head, and they come out at 1,000 words a day. And I get 3 months in, 4 months these days. I write slower. And there I've got what ultimately usually is 90% of the final draft. And it all just comes out of the back of my head as the character kind of goes from a fetus to a full-born baby.
Right.
And I don't know any other way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, however it works, it's I know I've shifted I've never done a complete like biography on the characters in advance because, like Ed, I think that would drive me crazy. And you have a whole list. I have notebooks full of story ideas, so to waste time going that in depth on a character would kill me when I have all these stories to tell. But I started out outlining just because I preferred to know where the beats were and where the story was going and where I wanted it to end up. But I never got too crazy about it. I did maybe a couple of bullets for each chapter. But since then, in the last 8 years or so, I've morphed to a much more informal outline. And like you said, Matt, I allow the characters to riff as I tell the story, but I still have the basis of the outline in the back of my mind so that I don't go wandering somewhere else, and there's never any writer's block because I already have the story figured out in advance via the outline, even if it's just a bullet per chapter or whatever. So I know where I need it to go, and then I just allow the characters and the story to surprise me from there. So I think it's a real good amalgamation of being a pantser and an outliner. But I had to arrive at that process for myself. Like you said, I tried to be one thing at one time, and it's evolved over time.
Yeah.
One reason my synopsizing looks the way it looks now is because for several years I have sold, since my first novel was picked up by Daw, every book I've sold to them since has been from a synopsis. So what my synopsis is naturally gravitate toward more of a proposal, really, for the book. And they tend to be, I don't know, 10 single spaced pages at most. But I sell the book and then I start writing, and I never look at that thing again unless somehow something is not going quite right. Then sometimes I'll go back and look at it and think, oh, that's what I originally thought I was going to do. That might actually work better than where we've actually ended up. And or on the other hand, there's been a couple of occasions when I'm maybe 70% of the way through the book and I have so totally departed from what I originally thought was going to happen, I have to completely replot to the end. So the original synopsis is out the window. Yeah, I think it's just a way of organizing the story and having a few touch points in your head so you kind of know where you're going. But so much of it happens in the actual writing process for me. It amazes me all the time because, I type, you're typing away and you're just typing and words are coming out of your fingers and they're appearing on the screen. And it's not like you're consciously thinking of what the next word is going to be. It just comes. And that's from practice, obviously, and from writing millions of years over the words, millions of words over the years. I think it becomes a very kind of unconscious process in a way, or subconscious, I guess would be a better word.
Well, I think it is an unconscious process for me. As I say, I have no idea what's going to happen when I start. In fact, I've got a book coming out from PS Publishing, I think before Christmas. They're always behind. They're a UK firm, very good. but it's called Ghost Dreams. And I started out to write, if you know who Thorne Smith was, a writer from the 30s and 40s. He wrote the Topper novels about ghosts and a stuffy banker. And I wanted to write, thought I wanted to write a Thorne Smith type farce about a burglar and a ghost, male burglar, female ghost. And so I started writing it. And then it occurred to me that he ought to have an interesting foil besides the ghost. So I created this high functioning autistic daughter. And then I got rid of his wife. He was a widower, so I had to work that out. The thing happened was that as I wrote, any sense of farce disappeared. And I found I was writing an offbeat romance of this guy and the ghost. And both of them people who'd been wounded in life and who, by finding each other, heal themselves. There's also a mystery, and there's blood diamonds and gun running and, the usual stuff. But it really quite took me a little by surprise, because I'm halfway through and I've got this, emotional story going on, and it was supposed to be a lot of hijinks, and I probably wouldn't have had them drink as much as Thorne Smith's characters did, but it would have been a lot of funny stuff and funny lines. And all of that just went away, and I had this other book. And I'm really quite fond of it. I think it turned out to be a nice story. But I was surprised by where I went, or where the guy in the back of my head took me, because that's how I think of it. There's a guy in the back of my head, and he feeds me 1,000 words a day. He already knows the story, apparently, because it comes out whole. He just doesn't tell me except bit by bit.
Ease you into it. Chuck, you got a last question before we go?
Yeah, so Matt, you had mentioned that you do some stuff with your newsletter and with Patreon. Do you have any I guess do's or don'ts for anybody who's paying attention to the show, like what you found is maybe best practices with either, or maybe just one of them? You could pick just the newsletter or just Patreon.
With Patreon, I give them goodies. Once or twice a year, a free ebook from my backlist. And anybody who signs up becomes a hero of the Arcanate, posted on my webpage for that. Mostly, though, I've been doing Patreon now for maybe 6 or 7 years, maybe even more. Yeah, I've done 69 newsletters, so yeah, it's getting on for 7 years. The thing that I've discovered is what people really want from me and what they're paying me is to write. Just want me to keep writing. I get that in emails from them. And the other thing that I was surprised by, I expected that I would get a lot of people giving me $1 or $2 a month. And not very many people giving me 10 or 15 or 20, but it's actually worked out the other way. I only have one person, I think, giving me $1 a month. I have a good 30 or so giving me like $3, $5, $5, and then it all goes up from there. I did have one guy until the pandemic took away his job. He was giving me over 100 a month.
Wow.
He was apparently very financially successful.
Mm-hmm.
I think I have 3 on my Patreon, and it hasn't grown since I started. So I'm clearly need to get on that.
Well, I find sending them a newsletter every month with as much information and news as I can put into it. I give them a free read of a backlist story every month. And this is surprising. The most popular link that people put on from my newsletter, the thing they click on the most, is I've been doing a kind of autobiography in progress, 1,200 to 1,500 words a month about some aspect, event in my unusual life. And people really seem to like that. Starting to think I should take it all together. I must have 50, 60,000 words by now, and I should make a book, put the damn thing out. I have some interesting stories to tell because I come from what they politely call the working poor. But by a fluke or two, I spent most of my adult life as a speechwriter and confidant and strategist for political leaders, premiers and mayors, and CEOs of billion-dollar companies, which made me a stranger in a strange land every time I went downtown, because that's not the milieu I come from. And I think that certainly affected my writing, because almost all of my characters, are oddballs and outliers, people who don't really fit their environment and have to find a way to make it work.
I'm kind of like Ed. I had a couple.
Do you do a newsletter?
Me? I do a newsletter, yes.
Yeah, good.
And Shadowpaw Press has
That's the
just
most
started a
important
newsletter
way.
as well.
It's the most important way to reach them.
I agree with that.
That's why I had you redo all of my books so that you get to the end of the book and you can sign up for the newsletter. That's worked quite well.
Yeah, I need to go back and redo all of my own to do that.
Yeah.
Well, it was awesome having you guys on. We could do this
Yeah.
for hours. I really appreciate you coming on.